Lady Eleanor of Eirendale was not unaccustomed to sacrifice. But on this night, a choice far greater than any she had ever faced weighed upon her heart. Bound by duty to her husband, Lord Alistair, she found herself drawn irresistibly to the one man she could never truly have. As she prepared to slip into the shadowed corridors of the castle, Eleanor's heart raced with both terror and longing. Tonight, under the cover of the feast celebration, she would see Sir Tristan again, the knight who held her heart captive, even as duty chained her to another. In that moment, Eleanor knew her life would never again be the same. And as she crossed into the dim torchlight, she remained unaware of the unseen eyes that watched her every step, silently sealing her fate. As dawn touched Eirendale's towers, Eleanor returned to her chambers, her heart weighed down by secrets and the knowledge that her actions had already set an irreversible course. The life she had always known was about to unravel. The castle of Eirendale stood tall against the evening sky, a fortress of stone and shadow, revered as much for its beauty as for the legends surrounding it. Within those ancient walls lived Lady Eleanor, a woman renowned for her grace and wisdom. Born into nobility, she was a jewel of the court, cherished by the people and envied by many. Yet, behind the elegance and calm of her visage, Eleanor bore a weight unknown to most, a burden veiled in secrecy and forbidden desire. Since her marriage to Lord Alistair, a fierce and ambitious noble, Eleanor had served as his dutiful wife. Her loyalty was unquestioned, her virtue unassailable, but her heart was neither his to command nor hers to offer freely. Her gaze often wandered beyond the walls of Eirendale, where the open fields stretched into freedom, a freedom she had never known. Lord Alistair's influence had grown vastly, and with it, the chains around Eleanor's heart tightened. She felt herself suffocating under the obligations, the loyalties, and the expectations of a life she had never chosen. Then came Sir Tristan, a knight of unrivaled bravery, sworn to protect Eirendale. He arrived with a battalion to strengthen Lord Alistair's defenses in preparation for an impending alliance with the neighboring kingdom of Alestria. Sir Tristan was no stranger to Lady Eleanor. They had grown up together before her marriage was arranged, and the bond between them was as natural as the river that flowed by the castle walls. It was inevitable that their paths would cross, and when they did, the unspoken words hung between them, an echo of a love that had once existed and yet never had the chance to bloom. Eleanor felt her pulse quicken each time she glimpsed him from across the halls or in the courtyard. And one fateful evening, while passing through the castle gardens, she found herself face to face with Sir Tristan. "Eleanor," he whispered, breaking the formal tone he used with everyone else. "You have been silent more than usual." Eleanor's voice faltered. Her words were careful, yet they carried the weight of 1,000 hidden emotions. "Tristan, it is not easy to be heard in a world that does not listen." But Tristan knew the true meaning behind her words. She could be seen but never truly known. She could be loved, but only in the shadows. He stepped closer, his gaze unrelenting. "Then let me be the one to listen." In that instant, as her heart fought the chains of loyalty and obligation, Eleanor understood the magnitude of her dilemma. To seek the comfort of Tristan's arms would be to betray her vows. Yet her heart, torn between duty and desire, yearned for something she could scarcely admit to herself. But as they stood there, a shadow moved along the castle walls, unseen eyes witnessing what should have been hidden. In the days that followed, Eleanor's resolve began to waver. She sought out Tristan under the guise of chance encounters, stolen moments in the gardens, and silent exchanges across crowded halls. The weight of their shared longing grew with each passing day, yet Eleanor's mind raced with dread. For though she longed for freedom, she feared the wrath that such an affair could unleash upon them both. But within the stone corridors of Eirendale, Walls had ears and eyes of their own. A servant, loyal to Lord Alistair and eager to earn his favor, had caught sight of Eleanor and Tristan's meetings. Word spread quickly among the castle staff, whispered rumors of a possible betrayal. Soon, even Alistair himself heard of the rumors. His suspicions, once dormant, sparked to life, and his pride was piqued by the mere possibility of such disgrace. Lord Alistair was no fool, nor a man to let disloyalty pass unchecked. Without confronting Eleanor directly, he ordered Tristan's immediate assignment to the distant northern borders, far from Eirendale and, more importantly, far from his wife. The news struck Eleanor like an arrow. When she learned of the order, her mind spun with fear and anguish. She needed to see Tristan one last time, if only to warn him of the danger that lay in Alistair's heart. Late that evening, Eleanor slipped from her chambers under the cover of darkness. She made her way to the barracks, where Tristan was preparing for his departure, his armor glinting under the torchlight. His face bore the calm determination of a soldier, but his eyes softened as they met Eleanor's. "Tristan, you cannot go, not without knowing that Alistair suspects us," she pleaded, her voice barely a whisper. Tristan shook his head, his expression unreadable. "If he suspects us, then I have already failed in my duty, Eleanor." "No, Tristan," she replied, her voice breaking. "You have done nothing but honor your duty and your word. It is I who—" Tristan gently placed a hand upon her cheek, silencing her with a touch. "Do not speak of guilt where love should dwell. Eleanor, if this is my last night in Eirendale, let it be one of truth." As they stood in the glow of torchlight, they made a silent promise, a vow beyond words, forged in the fire of unspoken dreams and forbidden desires. Yet fate would not allow even this brief moment of solace. Unbeknownst to them, Lord Alistair himself had come to the barracks that night, and his footsteps were drawing closer. Eleanor and Tristan turned at the sound of approaching footsteps. The flickering torchlight cast eerie shadows, and there, emerging from the darkened corridor, stood Lord Alistair, his expression cold and unyielding. His eyes, sharp as steel, moved between Eleanor and Tristan, assessing, calculating. "So," he began, his voice dripping with contempt, "this is where I find my wife and my knight." Eleanor's breath caught in her throat. She could see the storm in Alistair's gaze, and in that instant, she knew that her life, and perhaps Tristan's, would never be the same. Her fingers trembled, but she steadied herself, refusing to break under his gaze. "Lord Alistair, you misunderstand," she managed, her tone unwavering though her heart pounded within her chest. "Misunderstand?" he replied, a bitter smile forming on his lips. "Then enlighten me, my dear Eleanor. Explain to me why the woman sworn to be my wife and the knight sworn to be my sword stand together in the shadows." Tristan stepped forward, defiance in his stance. "If there is blame, let it fall upon me alone." Alistair's gaze darkened, his fists clenching as he resisted the urge to lash out. "Oh, rest assured, the blame is yours, Sir Tristan. But you, Eleanor," he turned to his wife, his voice dropping to a menacing whisper. "You were mine to protect, mine to cherish. I gave you everything." His words were laced with the venom of betrayal. Yet Eleanor could see the anguish hidden beneath. Though Alistair's love was as possessive as it was twisted, there was no denying its existence. She took a step back, torn between the two men, the one who held her heart and the one who held her fate. "Alistair," she began, choosing her words with care, "I never asked for the life you gave me." A silence fell over them, tense and unyielding. Alistair's face hardened, and he pointed a trembling finger at Tristan. "You will leave Eirendale by dawn," he commanded, his voice shaking with barely restrained fury. "And Eleanor, your betrayal will not be so easily forgiven." As Alistair turned to leave, Eleanor knew that the choice between love and duty had sealed her fate. But little did she realize that her fate was bound to a destiny darker than she could ever have imagined. As dawn's light crept over the castle of Eirendale, Eleanor felt the weight of her decisions settle heavily upon her heart. Her clandestine meetings with Tristan had been discovered, and Lord Alistair's rage threatened not only Tristan's life, but her own. With Tristan ordered to leave Eirendale immediately, Eleanor faced a grim reality. Her heart would be trapped forever in a loveless prison, and the man she loved would be exiled for her sake. Eleanor watched from the high towers as Tristan rode off, his figure slowly disappearing into the misty woods surrounding Eirendale. She clutched the cold stone of the battlements, her heart shattering with every beat. She wished she could shout to the winds to summon him back, but she knew that even the very walls of the castle had ears now. She was alone, with her heart chained to a distant night. Days turned into weeks, and Eleanor kept to her chambers, withdrawing from court affairs and distancing herself from Alistair. Her silence did not go unnoticed, and the whispers among the servants grew louder. She became the target of quiet glances and hushed conversations, and though Alistair had allowed her to stay by his side, the scars of their confrontation lingered. One evening, a young maidservant named Liana, one of the few people Eleanor trusted, slipped a piece of parchment under her chamber door. Eleanor's hands shook as she unfolded it. The note was from Tristan, and it was brief, a single line promising that he would return for her, that he would not allow her to suffer alone. Her heart surged with hope, but dread followed closely behind. She knew Alistair's wrath was great, and any attempt Tristan made to return to Eirendale would mean a swift death for them both. But Eleanor's heart leapt at the promise, and despite the danger, a plan began to form, a plan that would reunite her with Tristan, whatever the cost. As the harvest festival approached, the castle was filled with revelry, music, and wine. Alistair, eager to show the kingdom his strength and splendor, threw open the gates to all, turning the castle into a beacon of celebration. It was a night of laughter and feasting, but Eleanor felt only a hollow ache as she watched the merriment unfold. Yet that night, as the fires blazed in the great hall and the music played, Eleanor made a choice that would alter her fate. She slipped from the celebration, her heart pounding as she ventured toward the forest. She knew that in the darkest part of the woods, near the riverbank, Tristan would be waiting. With each step, the walls of the castle faded, and Eleanor felt a freedom she hadn't known in years. When she saw Tristan's silhouette by the river, her heart surged with both relief and fear. She ran to him, her voice barely a whisper as she called his name. They embraced, holding each other with the desperation of two souls caught between duty and desire. "Eleanor, I came as I promised," he murmured, his voice filled with an unspoken vow. "But if we are to be together, we must leave now. There is no place for us in Eirendale anymore." Eleanor nodded, knowing the truth of his words. She was ready to leave behind her life of nobility, her gilded prison, and risk everything for a love that had been denied to her. Yet, as they turned to flee, the faint rustle of leaves and the glint of steel in the torchlight revealed that they were not alone. Emerging from the shadows, Alistair's most loyal guards encircled them, and from behind the trees, Lord Alistair himself stepped forward, his face contorted with betrayal and fury. "So, my wife," he spat, his voice venomous, "you would abandon your title, your duty, for this wretched betrayal." Eleanor, clutching Tristan's arm, met Alistair's gaze without flinching. "You took everything from me," she replied, her voice steely. "My heart was never yours to command." Alistair's eyes darkened, and he drew his sword, pointing it at Tristan. "If you wish to steal my wife, Sir Tristan, then you shall pay with your life." As the guards tightened their circle, Eleanor realized the deadly game she had entered, and that the price of her freedom might be Tristan's very life. Tristan's hand instinctively went to his sword, and though he was outnumbered, he stood his ground, prepared to fight for Eleanor with every ounce of his strength. Eleanor, too, felt a surge of courage, though her heart trembled as she watched the deadly confrontation unfold. "You have no right to hold her," Tristan declared, his voice unwavering. "She is a free woman, not a possession." Alistair sneered, his grip on his sword tightening. "A woman bound by marriage is as much mine as any land or title I claim. You, however, are nothing more than a fool who overreached his place." Without another word, Alistair attacked, and the clash of steel against steel rang out in the darkened woods. Eleanor watched, frozen in terror and agony as the two men fought, each blow and parry a testament to the hate, jealousy, and forbidden love that had brought them to this night. The fight was brutal, relentless, and though Tristan fought valiantly, he was no match for Alistair's fury and the guard surrounding them. Just as Alistair's blade cut into Tristan's arm, sending him to his knees, Eleanor stepped forward, her voice piercing the night. "Enough," she cried. She threw herself between them, her hands raised in desperate defiance. "If you kill him, then you kill me as well?" Alistair paused, his face contorting in a mix of fury and disbelief. "You would die for this traitor?" Eleanor nodded, her gaze unwavering. "He has given me a love and freedom you never could. If I am to die, I would rather die beside him." A tense silence fell over them. Alistair's guards hesitated, glancing uncertainly at their lord. With a trembling breath, Alistair finally lowered his sword, his voice laced with a venomous sorrow. "Then leave," he growled. "But if you ever set foot in Eirendale again, both of you will be hunted until your last breath." As they fled into the shadows of the forest, Eleanor knew they were free at last. But she could feel the darkness of Alistair's wrath pursuing them, a curse that would follow them wherever they went. Tristan and Eleanor traveled by night, resting in abandoned cottages and hidden clearings, constantly looking over their shoulders for Alistair's men. Their love, though strong, was tested by hardship and fear, and each day seemed darker than the last. Yet they pressed forward, their only solace found in each other. Weeks turned to months, and though they managed to evade capture, the toll of their fugitive life wore on them. Then one evening, as they camped by a secluded river, they heard the distant sound of hooves, a warning that Alistair's men were once again closing in. Eleanor looked to Tristan, her heart heavy with both love and despair. "We cannot keep running forever, Tristan. Sooner or later, he will find us." Tristan clasped her hands in his face a mixture of determination and sorrow. "Then let us meet him on our terms. If Alistair wishes to see this through, then he will find us ready." And so, under the moonlight, they prepared for what they knew could be their final stand. With each moment that passed, Eleanor steeled herself, her mind focused not on the past, but on the love that had driven her to this point. But as the first signs of dawn appeared, Eleanor sensed that this would not be a battle of weapons alone. It would be a battle for the fate of their very souls. As the first light of dawn crept across the horizon, Eleanor and Tristan stood side by side, resolute in the face of their looming fate. They had prepared themselves as best as they could, their hearts bound together in the decision they had made. If they were to face Alistair, they would do so without fear. The bond they shared was beyond the reach of his wrath, and beyond the chains of their past lives. They heard the distant thunder of hooves long before they saw the riders cresting the hill, their silhouettes stark against the morning sky. At the front, unmistakable in his dark armor, was Lord Alistair. His eyes burned with the fire of betrayal and revenge, and his sword glinted menacingly as he approached, flanked by his most loyal guards. Alistair reined in his horse, staring down at the two figures before him, his expression a mixture of rage and bitter sorrow. "So, this is where you would choose to make your stand," he sneered, Tell me, Eleanor, was it worth it? Was this love worth casting aside everything I gave you? Eleanor's gaze was steady, her voice unyielding. You never gave me freedom, Alistair. You gave me a gilded cage. And when I found something true, you tried to tear it from me. Alistair dismounted, drawing his sword, his fury palpable. If you would stand with this traitor, he snarled, pointing his blade at Tristan, then you shall both fall by my hand. Tristan stepped forward, shielding Eleanor, his own sword drawn. If you desire vengeance, my lord, then take it against me alone. Eleanor is guilty only of seeking the life she was denied. Alistair laughed bitterly, shaking his head. You speak as though I would show mercy. You, who dared to touch what was mine, who stole the honor of my name. He lifted his sword, his voice dark and unforgiving. No, Tristan, there will be no mercy here. With a cry of defiance, Alistair lunged forward, and the battle began. The clash of steel echoed across the clearing as Tristan and Alistair fought, their swords moving with lethal precision. Tristan fought valiantly, each strike and parry fueled by his love for Eleanor. But Alistair's rage was unmatched. His blows were relentless, each one carrying the weight of his wounded pride and betrayed heart. Eleanor watched, her heart pounding, knowing that at any moment, the fight could end in tragedy. She called out to Tristan, urging him to be careful. But deep down, she knew that neither man would relent. This was a battle fought not only with weapons, but with hearts full of unspoken vows and shattered promises. Just as Alistair's blade was about to strike the final blow, Eleanor cried out, stepping between them, willing to give her life if it meant stopping the violence. Eleanor's scream cut through the morning air, and both men froze, their swords poised as if time itself had stopped. She threw herself between them, her arms outstretched, her face resolute. Enough, she shouted, her voice filled with a desperation that broke through the rage surrounding them. If you wish to kill him, Alistair, then you will have to kill me as well. Alistair's face twisted in anguish, his sword trembling as he looked into her eyes. Why, Eleanor? He whispered, his voice raw with pain. Why would you betray me so deeply? Eleanor's expression softened, her voice barely more than a whisper. Because love is not something that can be commanded or controlled, Alistair. I loved you once, in the way I knew how, but Tristan, he is the freedom I never knew, the life I was always denied. Alistair's sword fell to his side, the weight of her words piercing deeper than any blade. For a long moment, silence hung over them, broken only by the soft rustling of the trees. The guards shifted uncomfortably, uncertain of their lord's next command. Slowly, Alistair stepped back, his face drained of anger, replaced by a look of sorrowful acceptance. Then go, he murmured, his voice barely audible. Take your freedom, take this life you desire. He turned away, his gaze fixed on the horizon, as if he could no longer bear to look upon them. But know this, Eleanor, he said, his voice filled with a quiet bitterness. You may have won your freedom, but you will never be free of the choices you have made. Without another word, he walked away, his guards following in silent obedience. Tristan and Eleanor stood together, watching as the man who had once controlled their lives disappeared into the distance. Eleanor knew she had gained her freedom, but as she looked at the path ahead, she couldn't shake the feeling that Alistair's parting words would haunt her forever. As they left the clearing behind, Eleanor and Tristan walked in silence, the weight of their newfound freedom pressing heavily on their hearts. Though they had won the chance to live together, the scars of what they had endured lingered, a reminder of the cost of their love. Days turned into weeks, and as they journeyed further from Eirendale, Eleanor felt a sense of peace slowly returning. She and Tristan spoke often of their dreams, of the life they would build together, free from the chains of nobility and expectation. Yet, in the quiet hours of the night, Eleanor could not escape the memory of Alistair's final words, the bitterness and sorrow that had filled his voice. She knew that though she had chosen love, she would forever carry the weight of the betrayal it had caused. One evening, as they sat by a fire under a canopy of stars, Tristan took her hand, his gaze filled with both love and understanding. "We have faced much, Eleanor, and the road ahead may not be easy, but I would rather face any hardship by your side than live a life of comfort alone." Eleanor smiled, her heart swelling with gratitude. She realized that though her past would always be a part of her, it did not define her future. With Tristan, she could build a life of her own choosing, unbound by duty and untouched by fear. They continued their journey, leaving behind the shadows of the past and embracing the promise of what lay ahead. They would face the trials of life together, knowing that true freedom was not found in the absence of hardship, but in the strength to choose one's own path. And so, under the stars and the open sky, they walked hand in hand, free at last, bound not by duty, but by a love that could conquer even the darkest of fates. Years later, Eleanor stood at the edge of a quiet, sunlit valley, gazing into the distance where Eirendale's castle once loomed. Time had softened her face, and her once gilded robes had been replaced by simpler attire, suited to the peaceful life she and Tristan had carved out far from the whispers and treacheries of court. Yet, beneath the tranquility of her gaze lay the shadows of memories too potent to fade. The life she and Tristan had built was quiet but fulfilling, rich in moments of laughter and warmth, a far cry from the cold stone corridors of Eirendale. But she knew well that even in freedom, the heart bore its scars, and the echoes of the past had their way of haunting the present. Eleanor often thought of Alistair's final words, and though her mind knew she had chosen love, a part of her still felt the weight of that choice, a weight that reminded her that every freedom carried a price. As Tristan joined her, wrapping a comforting arm around her shoulders, she whispered, "Do you ever wonder, Tristan, about the paths we left behind? If we might have chosen differently?" Tristan's hand tightened around hers, and his gaze softened with understanding. "Every path demands its toll, Eleanor, but I have no regret, only the gratitude that, despite all, we found a life of our own." In the years that followed, their story spread like a whisper on the winds, told as a tale of love's defiance against the chains of power. Yet for Eleanor and Tristan, it was a reminder of the strength it took to break free, and the courage it required to face the consequences. As they turned away, Eleanor cast one last look toward the distant horizon, her heart both heavy and light. Their story had become more than just a chapter in Eirendale's past. It had grown into a legend, a quiet reminder that love, even in defiance, could leave an indelible mark on history. Perhaps somewhere others too faced the choice between loyalty and freedom, between love and duty. And as she walked into the warmth of her chosen life, Eleanor wondered what paths they would dare to tread, and at what cost they would find their freedom.